I had said that chapter 3 was my favorite chapter. And especially verse 18, it's an outstanding. The more I study 2 Corinthians, the more I appreciate it. I remember years ago, older preachers would talk about 2 Corinthians as being one of those evangelistic books. It's of the letters of the Apostle Paul. It's one of those that preachers need to study for motivation for their work in evangelism. But it's not just preachers, it's all Christians, because we all are evangelists to one degree or another. And in chapter 3 and verse 18, of course, is the one that speaks of the glory that the Lord gives us when we look into His image and we are transformed into the same image from glory to glory. And that is our work as evangelists. Our work as evangelists is to transform people. That's our job. I mean, we don't do it. I mean, it's what God does, but we participate with God. We share the image of God with us by our example and by our teaching. We display the glorious image of God. We teach what it looks like by teaching the Word of God. And as people see and hear, and if they believe it, if they really believe it and begin practicing those things, it will transform them. As Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Not being conformed to this world, but being transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's renewing of your knowledge. It's the knowledge of God is not a theological abstract thing. It is the knowledge of God's character and God's will. When we talk about the will of God, we're saying this is how God thinks. This is how God acts. It's a perfect character for us to imitate. And the whole idea of dying that we might live is to die to the old man. That is to die in the sense of the practices of sin, and in the sense of the way that you were thinking before that allowed you to sin, that weakened you, and then to begin to live is, if you are dead to the world, then you will live with Christ. Now that's fundamental, and I know we say it over and over again. I'd like us to realize that this is the most powerful message in the world and in the Bible. In Philippians 3 and 10, you remember that as the Apostle Paul talks about his ambitions and what he was striving to attain, and can you imagine the Apostle Paul being deficient in something and not, I mean, he appears to have been the ideal evangelist in his heart and his behavior and his self-sacrifice. I just can't imagine him being short of anything. But he's striving. He's striving. What is he striving? He's striving not only that he achieve the knowledge or what he calls the knowledge of the power of the resurrection. Okay? And I have often in my life, I've read that and I've wondered, what is he talking about? What is this power? And I think that my impression, like that of a lot of people, is that it must be something mystical or spiritual, something undefined, that it just kind of kicks in, kind of like when you practice throwing a ball at a target, and you stop thinking about it, you just keep throwing it, and with enough practice, finally you start getting more accurate, and you start hitting that strike zone, by the practice of it, and you don't understand how it works, but somehow it works. But when he's talking about the power of the resurrection, he's talking about the power of a motivation that would make a man so strong, so strong that he will not do otherwise than right. Now that's God. God cannot lie. How about that? Can you? Do you think that you could ever reach that state to where it would be impossible for you to lie? Have you known someone kind of like that? I think I have. There are people that are described as such. This man will lie, and no matter what it costs him, he will not lie. He will not lie about it. He'll tell you the truth. And when you know that that's true about somebody, you trust people like that. And you can do business with them, and you can have a good life with somebody that is that loyal to his principles. There's power in that. But we recognize that all men lie. We recognize that all men sin and all men fall short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23, that's a reality. But that doesn't deny that we should reach for the power of the resurrection, which can transform us into the image of God. Now, that's what he's driving at here. And in Philippians 3:20? No, I get my verses 2 and 12. I'm sorry. These scriptures that challenge us to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, and these scriptures that talk to us about longing to be like Jesus one day. And 1 John 3:1-2. How will we be? Well, we don't know, but we will be like him. And we think of that as being a physical reality in the resurrection, the physical resurrection, and that's true. We will be raised from the dead physically. But the point of all this discussion, clearly he uses it as a metaphor of something else. He keeps talking about the fact that we shall be like him now, and the more that we work at it, the more we will be like him. We want to be as like him as we can now, because we shall be like him in the resurrection. That's the whole. In order to reach the motivation to do that, you have to know the power of the resurrection. That's why the word occurs so much. Now, read with me how beautiful this is in chapter 5 and verse 1. He says, "For we know that if this tent, which is our earthly home, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." Compare and contrast a tent and a building. A tent or a house? Okay. Mm-hmm. It's less permanent than a house. Yeah. And if a tornado comes, which would you rather be in, a tent or a house? We understand. I don't know if you've ever lived in a mobile home. I have. Maybe several of us have at one time or another in our life, but our desire is not to spend our whole lives in a mobile home. If you live in a mobile home, it's just not a whole lot better than a tent when a tornado comes, right? When it's coming, you got to abandon your trailer and run, find something more substantial. A house, or better, a basement, or a hole in the ground. But the whole idea here is to contrast something that we are very much aware of. This body that we have is more like a tent, because it's also called a mortal body. Okay? Mortal means what? It's going to die. It can be killed. Like that. Any one of us tonight on our way home can be killed in a car accident. Happens all the time. Life hangs by a thread, and every day we have is a special gift of God. But he talks about our mortal bodies inheriting an immortal home or house or body in which we have no corruption and there's no death and there's no dying. The motivation surrounding that is powerful and essential because the Lord calls upon us to make sacrifices that can cost our lives. And if we're going to do the things the Lord wants us to do, we've got to be completely convinced that it's worth it. We've got to be completely sure that should I lose my life, that actually I'll have something better. Now, he says, it's eternal in the heavens. For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling, if indeed by putting it on we may not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. So we are always of good courage. Focus on that. We're of good courage. When you hear that phrase, what does that mean to you? We are always of good courage. What are they trying to express, you think? Okay? To be confident, you will have courage. And we think of good courage as being happy courage. That is, it's a courage in which we are not morose and we are not fatalistic, but we are actually optimistic and hopeful and motivated. And so, as he says, we know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. He talks that way in Philippians 1, remember? So we are at home, or whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please Him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. Do you believe that? Do you believe, okay, that we will be judged according to what we have done in this body, whether it be good or evil, whether God approves of it or does not approve of it? He says, because I believe that, he says, I make it my aim to please Him. How do you please somebody? Figure out what they want. Got to find out what they want. Okay? And when you know what they want, you do it. How do you please your wife? How do you keep her happy? Now, communication helps because you need to know what is she thinking. Do you think that she wants you to always have to do what she tells you to do? Is that what that's about? And then some. Yeah. But the idea, a good husband, if he wants to please his wife, he doesn't wait to be told or asked. He anticipates. He knows. He knows her. He anticipates. And he does everything he can to make that possible. See?
run with that for a second. But early in our marriage, I used to tease Gloria because she, instead of saying, "Would you please do this?" or she would say, "Do you want to do this? Or do you want to do that?"
Yeah.
You know, for a while I was like, "No,
Not really.
Yeah, wrong answer.
Wrong answer.
Yeah, you need to change your thinking.
Yeah.
From what she was saying, what she wanted this done.
Yeah.
When I figured out,
Yeah.
you know, that's where she was headed with that.
That's right.
I need to figure out how to want to do
Yes. I got to find out. I got to want the right things, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And of course, that's the way it is with pleasing our God. Same thing. But now, because he believes that, and what I'm trying to read here in these verses, Paul is expanding on the teaching of Jesus, because Jesus talks about this a lot, not in these words, but Jesus opened the door to all of these things. And I would like us to look at that just for a little bit. And that may be all I can do tonight. I have some other key thoughts in this chapter I'd like to get to if we can. But in the very beginning, Jesus demonstrated the reality of the possibility that we shall be raised by raising from the dead 3 different people. Okay, can you name the 3? What 3 people?
Widow's son of Nain.
I'm sorry?
The widow's son
Yes.
of Nain.
Okay, right. The son of the widow of Nain, okay. Jairus' daughter, and Lazarus. You had the 12-year-old girl first, Jairus' daughter, and then you had the widow of Nain, the son of the widow of Nain, and then lastly, you had Lazarus. And if you think about it, there's a progression there, because the Jairus' daughter had just died when Jesus got there, and they had sent a messenger to Jesus as he was making his way there, say, "Don't bother the master, she has died." Okay, and then in the case of the son of the widow of Nain, what was going on when Jesus was there?
Interrupted the funeral.
They were in the middle of the funeral, so it's been a little bit more time has passed this time. What about Lazarus? He was already buried, right? And when Jesus said to Martha, "Open the door to the tomb," what did she say? It's been 4 days, Lord. You don't want to have to smell that. Okay. Now, what the Lord has shown us step by step, as it doesn't matter if it's death for a moment, or for several moments, or for years and years, because the power of God to raise the dead does not depend upon whether or not the body has been corrupted yet. Now, when the body dies, and we don't need to go into a lot of detail about this, but the body, when it dies, it begins to decompose very quickly. The blood is no longer moving through the body, so it stops. And what do you suppose it does then? It begins to get thick and solid. And if you've ever touched the face of a dead person, how does it feel? Aside from cold, it's hard, it's firm. They call that rigor mortis, because that's what happens to the body. And then beyond that, all of the internal organs begin to decompose. And the longer you wait to begin the healing process, the less realistically, you can't realistically hope for any kind of healing. It's got to be more than healing. The body is very quickly turning to dust. It doesn't take that long. We put those bodies in a casket and we put embalming fluid and all that to kind of delay the process of decomposition. But even that does not keep it from rapidly, the flesh falls off of the bone and it turns to dust. And so when you have the Lord talking about raising the dead, when it's been years ago, it is beyond human comprehension that God might be able to do that. But He's demonstrated that He can, and He promises that He will. Now, we have these examples. We're told in the case of Jairus' daughter in Luke 8:55, her spirit returned. And in the case of the discussion with Jesus and Martha about Lazarus, before He raised him, he tells her he will rise again. He says, Lord, I know he'll rise in the resurrection. And then He says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Okay? Can He have life again? Yes, He can. And that becomes a metaphor of our life, because when we're not like God, when we are dead in sin, we are not alive. When we are guilty of sin and when we are practicing sin, we are walking zombies. We are dead while we're alive. Can you transform a sinner into the image of God? Is there any sinner that cannot be transformed in the image of God? And you can probably think of a whole bunch of them that it's just not going to happen, right? I know a lot of people like that, I think. I'm just sure it just is not going to happen. But the gospel message is it can. And we're not the ones who are going to be able to say what can and cannot do. What is it that God cannot do? You remember when you had the rich young ruler and he was discouraged and he left, and the disciples said, who then can be saved? What did Jesus say, you remember? With men, it's not possible. But with God, all things are possible. And we're beginning to understand from all of this message, we're dealing with something that is powerful beyond all of human experience. And we've got to believe in it. We've got to believe in our God. Now, as we're reading this, Jesus, you remember, not only raised those three, but He also began talking about His own death. Look in John 2:19. In fact, He talked a lot about His own death and His own resurrection. Let's see, John 2:19. Let's see, verse 18. So the Jews said to Him, what sign do you show us for doing these things? Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The Jews then said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But He was speaking about the temple of His body. When therefore He was raised from the dead, His disciples remembered that He had said this, and they believed the Scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. If you will look for it, in fact, with a concordance, you'll find a lot more than what you expect to find. This phrase, we're told over and over and over again, this fact that when Jesus was raised, then they understood. But He was talking about it. From the very beginning, He was talking about He would die and He would be raised again from the dead. Matthew 16:21, after the great confession of the Apostle Peter, we have this statement in verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show His disciples that He must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took Him aside and began to rebuke Him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. But He turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan, you are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. And then He begins talking there about taking up your cross and following me. Not only was He saying that I'm going to die and be raised, He says, you're going to die. In fact, he's saying you're going to have to be ready to deny what you want and then take up a cross, which is, it's symbolic, of course, but a symbol of what? Take up your cross. What's a symbol of? What's the cross a symbol of? Death. Right. Now, and not just any ordinary death. I mean, a lot of people are not afraid of dying, you know. I mean, I think we all have a little bit of a fear of death. I mean, it's just we have an instinct to want to live. Nobody wants to die. But the question of how will you die? How do you want to die? In my sleep. That's how I want to die, don't you? I'd like to just go to sleep one day and not wake up. I can think of a lot of ways I would rather not die, and I don't want to tell you this because I'll have nightmares tonight if I do that. I don't want to do that. But I certainly would not want to be crucified. And when Jesus says, take up your cross, he's saying, follow me. And it's a way that may seem like certain death, and it may be certain death, and it may be a terrible death. For hundreds of years, men have endured the worst of tortures with a song in their hearts, like Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail, singing at midnight after being whipped with a scourge. They were doing that because of this, because they were following Jesus. They accepted it. Now, going into the further development, chapter 17, verse 9, he comes back to the thought again. There's actually 3 times where he explicitly says this. He says, as they were coming down from the mountain, okay, this is the mountain of transfiguration. This is where they saw Jesus transformed and shining, brightly shining and transfigured before their eyes. And then he says, tell no one of the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Don't tell anyone till. What does that mean? If he is raised from the dead, he had to die. He's saying, I'm going to die, but I'm going to be raised. It was on his lips as he instructed them in every step of the way. In chapter 20 and verse 19, in this case, he just had the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. And then in 17, he says, as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside, and on the way he said to them, see, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and he will be raised the 3rd day. And I know what the disciples might have been thinking at this time. Jesus keeps saying these things that are going to get him in trouble. They keep taking him aside. Listen, what you're saying is offensive to the scribes and the Pharisees. They're getting angry at you. They're going to want to kill you. They're trying to get Jesus to tone down the rhetoric and quit correcting the sins and quit exposing the darkness of these people. But they have it in their mind, this Jesus, he's such an amazing person, amazing prophet, amazing Lord, amazing leader, and he just happens to know that no matter what he says or what he does, nobody can lay a hand on him.
As long as he doesn't.
But they were going to. That's right. They needed to know that. In other words, knowing that they were going to do this, he said it anyway. He did what he had to do anyway, knowing that he was going to die on the cross as a result of all these things that he said and did. And this is what he's teaching us. He's not saying that we're going to have a wonderful life, and we will have a wonderful life, no doubt about that. But we are going to be mistreated by a lot of people. We're going to be hated by a lot of people. If we follow Him, if we accept the example that He's left behind. In chapter 26, then, you have the scene that we often read at the Lord's Supper, where you have Jesus with the disciples, and they're eating the Passover together. And then there is a change. Let's see. Wait a minute. This is after the Lord's Supper. I was going to read that. Let's see. Let's go ahead and read first in the Lord's Supper in about verse 38, is it? No, it's early. It's 20. It's 20. I didn't write this one down. Okay, verse 26. As they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and after blessing it, broke it, gave it to the disciples, said, "Take, eat, this is my body." He took the cup. When he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." What kind of a metaphor is that? It wasn't a metaphor, was it? That was literal. My blood. I'm teaching you to celebrate the fact that I'm going to pour out my blood for the forgiveness of your sins. But then later on the Mount of Olives, this is where I was going to go next, verse 32. We're told, and they sang a hymn, verse 30, and they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." And you have Peter, saying, "No, I'd never leave you." But the point is, he's saying, I'm going to be raised because I'm going to die. And my death is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the story. Chapter 27 and verse 63. Now we have the scene at the tomb. Next day, that is, after the day of the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, 'He has risen from the dead,' and the last fraud will be worse than the first." And Pilate said, "You have your guard." Okay. So, did the people who heard Jesus, did they understand what he was saying about his death? They understood what he said. They didn't believe it, but they understood it. And so they were anticipating that this would be an issue. And if Jesus' body disappears, somebody's going to say he was risen because he always said he would. The purpose of saying that he was going to rise was fundamental to the power of the gospel. And so that point is being emphasized and emphasized. So, after he was raised, let's go to Luke 24 and 7. Just to get out of Matthew for a minute. Matthew 24 and verse 7. On the first day of the week, verse 1, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day rise." Is he saying they never died? Is that what he's saying? Why are you looking for the dead? He's not dead. He's right. He's alive. He never died. No, that's not what he's saying. He's risen. He has been raised from the dead. The angels said this, and they heard this. And he said, now, he's waiting for you. He will go before you to Galilee. And they looked forward to seeing him there, and they did. Mark 16:9 says he rose very early on the first day of the week. And verse 14, he was seen. And then John, look in John 21 and verse 14. Notice this is the scene where Jesus has breakfast with the apostles up in Galilee. They've been out fishing. Verse 9, when they had got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and said with the fish, this is now the third time that Jesus revealed to the disciples, or was revealed to the disciples, after he was raised from the dead. That phrase is repeated. Why does he keep saying the same thing over and over again? He was raised from the dead. Raised from the dead. Over and over again. I mean, you don't have to say it that way. But the Holy Spirit does not leave that to be assumed. He repeats it and repeats it because we've got to understand the importance and the significance of it. Now, let's go back to when Jesus refuted the Sadducees back in Matthew 22. You remember the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. You see, if the Sadducees were correct, everything that Jesus stood for, and the whole idea of Judgment Day was totally irrelevant. If there is no resurrection, how can there be a Judgment Day? There can't be. God will never punish you. Now, you might be punished by life, by being foolish, or by being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or getting crossed up with a violent man, and that would be the end of you. And they had their little query in verse 23 about the levirate marriage. But Jesus answered them in verse 29. You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. That was the problem. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. Jesus proved categorically that the Scriptures taught that Abraham was alive 400 years after he died. Now, if they believed Moses, they had to accept that. Now, the importance of that is found then in the further discussion we have here in 2 Corinthians 5. If it is true that we are raised, what can we anticipate? What does that imply? Well, this earthly house, this body is just a house. It's a tent. And the Lord's going to give me a house not made with human hands. The moment Jesus died, many of the tombs who were in the tombs, Matthew 27:63, came forth. Notice that. Matthew 27 and 53. In verse 50, and Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were opened. And many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "This truly was the Son of God." Why did the Lord do that? I mean, that's really spooky. I mean, we have movies about that. All the tombs are open. Not all, but a lot of tombs are open. And now you have all of these people that were just dust and bones. Now they're living. They're living. And they're walking among the people. They would have to introduce themselves. Grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, perhaps, walking among the members of their family. The point of that is we shall be raised. God can do it. He's promised that He will. And when He does, Luke 14:14, Jesus said, that will be a very important day, because on that day, we will be paid for those things that we are not paid for in this life. Notice He says, but when you give a feast and invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. I hear that commonly in the Spanish world. When I would do a favor for somebody, that they would answer, "May the Lord repay you." It's beautiful. That's how they say, "Thank you. May the Lord repay you." And you understand that when you do these things, you're losing money. You're losing time. You're losing a lot. Will you ever be repaid for that? Maybe not in this life. But this life is not all that there is. God bless you. I've enjoyed this. I didn't get through with my lesson, of course. Lord willing, we'll come back to that. Please spend some more time in chapter 5. And maybe you can anticipate and get ahead of me on some of these other points that you find in the mouth of Jesus that the Apostle Paul is expanding on.